All right, last basketball topic before I go. I just want to say a goodbye to Danny Ainge. I mean, Danny, you've been on the job for almost 20 years. You won a championship. You won a lot of trades. You didn't make a lot of trades, but you won a lot of trades, Boy, when you made a trade, you sure won it. And now you're gone because you put together a absolutely terrible roster that could not win. And even the best roster that you put together after 2010 were never taken seriously as contenders, if we're being honest. And now hear me out. Danny Ainge deserves to work again in this league, but he needs to go to a team that does not have expectations. He needs to go to a Memphis. He needs to go to Oklahoma City. He needs to go to a Utah Jazz. He needs to go to a Sacramento Kings. He needs to go to a LA Clippers. He needs to go to the New York Knicks. I mean, and I'm saying these teams, not saying that they want or need a new executive. I'm just saying teams that don't have expectations of winning championships. Because if you want to build a consistent team, a consistent winner, Danny Ainge is your guy. But if you want to build a consistent championship contender, he's not your guy. And it's funny to listen to how it's been covered because the national media has pretty much said, yeah, good riddance, Danny. You were good, but you weren't good enough for the market that you were in. And then the Boston-based media is like, oh, man, no, Danny did a great job. He did this, he did that. And I go, yeah, he did that. But, I mean, if we're going to be honest, Kevin McHale is the guy who should get credit for Danny Ainge's championship because Kevin McHale gave you Kevin Garnett after you signed Ray Allen. Danny Ainge, on the other hand, he did get that haul, which ended up landing you Tatum and Brown. But if you look at Tatum and Brown together, they're Paul George and Kawhi Leonard light. Not as good, and their supporting cast was even worse. So guess what? You're a 7th seed, and you're bounced in the first round. That's what Danny built. When it was up to Danny to actually build the roster out himself, it wasn't good enough. It wasn't a contender. And because you're Boston, because you're title town, because you have the Patriots, you have the Red Sox who have won multiple championships in the last decade, the last 15 to 20 years, guess what? Danny didn't measure up. The Celtics have won since the 80s. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Celtics have won one championship. And guess what? They are an overrated franchise in modern history. They dominated in the early days of the game when painters and custodians and factory workers played in the league. And don't get me wrong, they were one of the first teams to integrate. I want to say they're the first team to have all black starting 5. They were the first team to hire a black coach. But guess what? They had their run in the 80s with Larry Bird, and after that, they just became a man. But because they won so early, we try to treat them like they are NBA royalty. And guess what? Michigan has all those national championships that no one saw and no one cares about. And guess what? Now we treat them like a second-tier program, a program that their fans expect to be great, but their history says they're not going to be great, and that's the Boston Celtics. Your fans expect you to be great, but your history says that, you know what, your greatest years are behind you, and now you're above average, but you're not elite. And that's why Danny Ainge had to go. And I have no idea if Brad Stevens was the right hire. I assume they didn't want him to go coach somewhere, maybe take over Milwaukee after they get swept by Brooklyn and beat their faces in. But I'm not going to get on this whole, he don't deserve that job because I don't know who deserves what, because I hear he has a great basketball mind, and maybe his message grew stale in the locker room. Maybe his inability to coach stars grew stale, so now he needs to go recruit them. The guy who can't coach him can go recruit him. So maybe his basketball mind is so great that he'll be better off in the front office, but I don't know. Best of luck to Brad Stevens. Best of luck to Danny Ainge. Danny Ainge is going to fall on his feet. But, one last thing about Danny Ainge. when he said he was not familiar with any type of racism in that in Boston and in Boston sports, man, get out of here. That's the reason why they should have sent your ass packing, was because you failed to relate to the athletes that you're trying to get on your team. They already say we don't want to come to this city, and then you're going to double down and say, well, in my experience, I don't know anything. Have you asked any of your teammates? You asked any of your former teammates? Have you talked to the players on your team? I mean, Tristan Thompson came out and said, yeah, when you play here, they treat you great, but when you play against them, they treat you terribly. So there's a disconnect.